Ever wondered why a kid totally thrives in one room but completely shuts down in another? It's like flipping a switch, right? Well, today we are diving into sensory-friendly learning design. We're going to talk about how to take complex, chaotic environments and turn them into clear, manageable spaces for early learners. If you're looking to understand what's really happening behind the scenes of a child's attention, you are in the exact right place. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start by unpacking the basics of sensory load, move into why predictability matters so much, and then look at designing for real everyday classrooms. We'll also touch on how our own adult behavior plays a huge role in all of this, and wrap up with some common mistakes to avoid. By the end of our time together, you aren't just going to have a list of facts memorized. You're going to walk away with a completely new mental model for how you look at a room. We'll explain why the quietest room isn't necessarily the best room, figure out how to design spaces that cut down on unnecessary decisions, and assess environments as a complete, living system of signals. Let's start with a foundational idea. Imagine a classroom as a mental workbench. If that workbench is super cluttered, incredibly noisy, and poorly lit, all of a child's energy just goes into avoiding bumps rather than actually building anything. Sensory design lowers that unnecessary load without making the experience boring. It creates enough safety for attention to just settle. Learning literally requires room for processing. Everything else flows from that. Think of the total pressure on the nervous system, what we call sensory load, like having your phone on full brightness with way too many background apps open. Your battery is draining, fast. The brain doesn't neatly separate the buzzing of a fluorescent light, the smell of strong cleaning supplies, or the unpredictability of a sudden loud voice. It just experiences combined demand. Light, smell, movement, they all drain the exact same battery. To put it simply, a child's attention is a budget. When the sensory load in a space is high, all those funds are spent on monitoring the room and basic survival. That leaves significantly less room for actual learning. So if a kid seems totally checked out or distracted, they might not lack interest. They might literally just be out of processing funds. Let's apply this to the real world. Think about trying to read a really complicated book in a crowded, noisy subway station. You'd struggle, right? But it's because of the motion and the loud announcements, not because you suddenly forgot how to read. That's exactly what a student is experiencing. For the designers out there, this means you stop chasing one single, magical, perfect setting. Instead, you need to evaluate the combined effects of the whole space, like how brightness interacts with super busy walls. All right, quick recap on our first big concept. Load is relative, not absolute. A tired or hungry kid simply has less capacity available that day. And remember, not all input is bad. Some input actually helps us orient ourselves in a space. But here's the golden rule, the memory tip to really lock in. The nervous system is always making a budget. A child's behavior is often just information telling us if they still have processing room left. Okay, moving on to our second concept, predictability. Imagine walking down a super uneven, bumpy stone path in the pitch dark. Pretty stressful, right? Now imagine walking that exact same path in broad daylight. The physical stones didn't change at all, but your ability to prepare completely transformed the experience. That is the power of predictability. The nervous system reacts to surprise just as strongly as it reacts to intensity. A child can tolerate significantly more input when they know exactly what's coming. When they have real choices, like being able to adjust their posture or move a little further away, the environment instantly becomes workable. It literally gives their nervous system a way to self-correct before that overload builds up. Let's look at how this plays out. Say a chair makes a loud scraping noise on the floor. If a teacher gives a quick verbal cue before everyone moves, that sound becomes expected rather than a jarring surprise. That simple heads up immediately lowers the load. Or, from a design perspective, offering genuinely viable seating options, or maybe two totally different types of chairs actually fit a child's body, provides real, meaningful choice for self-correction. So to summarize, surprise absolutely multiplies intensity. When we have rigid, fixed expectations, those can act as strict barriers, causing a child to freeze up or melt down. Real choice allows for that crucial self-correction. And again, keep in mind, behavior is often just information about load. It's not always defiance. Sometimes it's literally just a child's body saying, hey, this is too fast or too unclear. Now let's talk about the physical classroom itself. There's a really interesting trade-off here. We actually do not want a completely plain, sterile room. That leaves kids feeling disconnected and underinvited, which just causes restlessness. What we really want is a legible room. A space with a clear purpose, very few competing messages, and understandable transitions. A classroom is an entire interconnected system, not just a random list of furniture. If a child is constantly thinking, where do I sit? Or what do we do now? They are spending their precious attention budget just trying to orient themselves. We call this accumulated friction. Good design is all about stepping in and reducing those unnecessary orientation decisions. We have to engineer the space to reduce these micro interruptions. For instance, ensuring backpacks always have one consistent dedicated spot means zero searching, less friction. Or for designers, creating very clear visual zones completely stops the confusion about where specific activities are supposed to happen. It's all about making the room naturally answer their questions for them. Think of classrooms like river systems. The banks of a river shape the flow of the water, right? Well, your room's layout shapes the flow of attention. Accumulated friction exhausts that attention before the learning even begins. So aim for legibility. A great memory tip to jot down here is, design is less like decorating and a lot more like engineering attention. Okay, let's level this up and talk about reducing language load through cognitive design. If a child has to constantly decode long, complicated verbal explanations, the environment is relying way too much on speech alone. The ideal sequence goes exactly like this. The adult stops speaking, the room steps in to carry the message visually, and boom, the child's attention is entirely freed up for the actual task. Here's the thing about verbal instructions. They disappear the exact second you say them. Gone. But if you spread that information out across the physical space, children don't have to desperately hold your directions in their working memory. You are actively, tangibly reducing their cognitive burden.
Imagine a busy classroom. If a teacher uses consistent visual boundaries for a group area, the kids naturally stay put without drifting. That means way fewer verbal corrections are needed. And utilizing labeled bins or visual schedules fundamentally changes the game. It allows for total independent access without a child having to constantly ask an adult what to do next.
Quick recap on this one. Replace those fleeting words with permanent physical cues. Let signs, labels, and boundaries do the heavy lifting to reduce that cognitive demand. Because, and here's your memory tip, the room can keep speaking long after the adult stops. This brings us to a super important variable, timing and adult behavior. Spaces completely change over time. A room that feels totally fine and manageable at 8:30 in the morning might be incredibly overwhelming by 11 a.m. when everyone's bodies are tired and restless. Good design has to adapt to these shifts in density and energy. Predictable entry routines, visual countdowns for transitions, and protected spaces for deep work are all brilliant responses to these completely predictable challenges. But here is the real kicker. You have to remember that the room is the physical space, plus the adults inside it. You are a physical part of the environment. Your presence, your speed of speech, your proximity, these are all massive design elements. Fast speech, sudden changes, or yelling across a room, that spikes the sensory load instantly for everyone in earshot. Simply closing the physical distance before you speak, using calm, close-range communication instead of hollering across the room, immediately lowers the overall load. And as for the physical space, you might have to accept some intentional trade-offs. Maybe materials are left slightly visible, which isn't perfectly aesthetically tidy, but if it aids independent access and reduces confusion, that's a brilliant trade-off to make. Environments are not static, and neither are we. It's absolutely normal to make intentional trade-offs. Honestly, that's what expert design looks like. So write this one down. The room is the physical space plus the social atmosphere. All right, before we wrap up, let's talk about a few common traps people fall into. Mistake number 1, treating load only as noise. That totally ignores light and movement. Mistake 2, thinking overload is a fixed personality trait. It's not. It is an environment fit problem. Also, don't make rooms entirely plain. That just makes kids feel underinvited. And please, be careful with background music. You might think it's calming, but always ask what new problem it might be creating. Lastly, don't judge needs based on a single moment. Always look at the accumulated friction over the entire day. Let's do a quick rundown of our main takeaways from this explainer. Sensory load is a capacity budget. Predictability and choice actively lower the nervous system's load. Always remember that behavior is just information about overload. Treat classrooms like the complex systems they are, and design for legibility to cut down on those unnecessary orientation decisions. Let the physical space carry your instructions, recognize that your own behavior is a core design element, and remember that true inclusion shapes the very conditions for access. Okay, Time for a quick mental check to see what stuck. Let's start easy. Can you name 3 sources of sensory load besides noise? Take a second. Does sensory load stay the exact same throughout the day? And true or false, sensory design is primarily about decorating. I really hope you said false on that last one. Taking it a step further, why is walking a dark, uneven path so much harder than doing it in the daylight? How does accumulated friction, those 20 tiny, annoying interruptions, basically bankrupt a child's capacity budget before they even get a chance to learn? And can you name 2 ways to genuinely reduce the language load in a room? Finally, some conceptual food for thought. I want you to evaluate how your own behavior interacts with the physical design around you. Think about how a classroom functions just like a river system, naturally guiding the flow of attention. What does it actually mean to decide where a child's capacity gets spent? Which brings us to our final thought. If sensory design literally dictates exactly what the brain can afford to do, look around. What is the invisible cost of the room you are sitting in right now? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.